Good evening. I'll call this meeting of the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee to order. Today is Tuesday, June 21st. We are in the council chambers of City Hall. Number 2, identify conflicts of interest or potential conflicts of interest. Does anybody have anything they wish to comment or announce? Mrs. Tompkins.
I'm an employee of Marshfield Clinic pertaining to number 13.
Okay.
I guess I'm asking the committee's advice of whether I should recuse myself of that discussion.
I also am an employee of the Marshfield Clinic Health System. In the past, when we've had potentially more controversial items discussed, I've been told by our attorney that it's not a conflict if it has no direct impact on us as employees. I guess at this point, this being just the discussion of opening up the topic, I don't think that there's any concern, but we will leave it up to the rest of the committee to make that decision.
It's my understanding that as long as neither you nor your family benefit directly from any action that may be taken on the subject, that it is not a conflict of interest.
But does the committee have any concern with the two of us?
I would not have any concern with either one of you voting no.
I feel like Mr. Barg has something to add.
Mr. Barg?
Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, no, this is a longstanding difference, I think, that we talk about from time to time between a legal conflict of interest and a perceived conflict of interest. And for sometimes, if you feel it might look like you have a conflict of interest, you might step aside. In this case, there's not any decision being made. This is just simply whether or not we put a bookmark in to allow conversation about these contracts. So I would suggest that neither one of you probably have a conflict that you need to worry about. I don't mean to be playing attorney, but that's my understanding.
Thank you. Any other discussion on that then? All right, any other further potential conflicts of interest to be announced or discussed? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to citizens' comments. Any citizens wish to address the committee? Second call. Third call for citizens' comments. Seeing none, we'll move on to number 4, the consent agenda. You have before you the minutes of June 7th meeting, the bills and payroll, and the report of personnel actions. What is your desire? Mr. Wagner.
Move approval.
Move to approve for Mr. Wagner, second by Mrs. Spiros. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? That motion carries. Nothing was removed from the consent agenda, so we'll jump to number 6, request to recommend council approval to refill the vacant position of PT Library Custodian, presented by Jill Porter, Library Director. Jill.
Thank you, Chair. My memo's in front of you. We have Zach Zarnke, who's worked for us for a number of years, who works between 16 and 20 hours. Because he's usually working 16 hours, he receives no benefits. He has accepted a full-time position elsewhere with benefits, and we would like to replace this position as quickly as possible since he is one of our 1.3 employees in that department, and we're going to have other staff taking care of all the duties that Zach normally does and while we try to replace him. Because the position pays fairly low, I told Steve that we're probably going to look to post this at the mid-range, maybe step 5 for this position. The person in this position typically works in the evenings or early morning hours on their own, so we'd like someone with some maturity that we can count on, particularly with library privacy issues and also the fact that they're going to be working on their own. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, but it's pretty cut and dry.
What is your pleasure? Mrs. Spiros?
Move to approve.
We have a motion to approve, seconded by Mrs. Tompkins. Any discussion? Mr. Wagner? No?
Hey, what, bro?
Okay. If there's no further discussion, we'll vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? That motion carries.
Thank you.
Number 7, request to recommend council approval to refill the vacant position of Equipment Operator 1 in the Streets Department, presented by Chris Hawley, Street Superintendent.
Thank you, Chairman Witzel, and good evening, everybody. It feels like it's been forever since I stood up here back in February to request a position, but it's just want to say that things are going pretty good over there, and a lot of that has to do with the support that we are receiving from you. But first and foremost, I want to thank Tyler Grosskreitz, who has been with us for just over a year now. Tyler was a great team employer, a great fit at the Street Division, and was well-liked and respected by his peers. He grew up in Auburndale, and due to a retirement, he has the opportunity to run their public works facilities for them. So they hounded him pretty good and moved him over to Auburndale. So my request tonight is to refill the soon-to-be vacant equipment operator one position, which will be Thursday. Is his last day, and direct HR or staff to begin advertising for the position.
Pleasure. Mrs. Spiros,
So moved.
and seconded by Mrs. Tompkins. Any discussion?
Yeah.
Mr. Wagner?
Yeah, is this vacancy, is he more than an operator one? Is this a,
He's equipment operator one, yes.
okay, so
Yep,
he,
so we're
so this is
looking for
one for
one.
one, this isn't somebody moving up the ladder?
No.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Any other discussion or questions? Seeing none, we have a motion to approve. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries.
Thank you.
Number 8, request to recommend council approval of memorandum of agreement with the fire union to extend the use of the eligibility list for the lieutenant position to 24 months, presented by Pete Fletty, Fire Chief.
Good evening, thank you. So what we're looking to do here is, in the current contract, the lieutenant promotional process, eligibility list lasts 12 months. Our deputy chief and relief lieutenant eligibility lists last 24 months. What we're looking to do is try to get this on the same timeline and not have to run an eligibility list every single year. It would simplify everything. And being this is in the contract, we do have to sign a memorandum of agreement to make this happen. So we're just looking for approval to move the lieutenant eligibility list to 24 months instead of 12.
What's your pleasure? Mr. Wagner?
Move approval.
Second by Mrs. Spiros. Any discussion?
Just,
Yes, Mr. Wagner.
yeah, police and fire is involved, commission is involved in this too, correct?
Yes, I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that. Police and Fire Commission approved this last week.
And our interest in it is only in the pay grade and that sort of thing, is that right?
It's just in the contract, so in order to approve that through the
Right, or in
contract,
the
we need that.
contract too.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All right, seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries.
Thank you.
Number 9, request to recommend council approval to submit a PT clerical position, Parks and Recreation Department, to the city's compensation consultant for compensation evaluation, presented by Justin Casperson, Parks and Recreation Director. Justin.
You sound like a good voiceover person tonight,
I've been
Tom.
told I
I'm
have
not
a
sure
good-
why, but you do. Parks and Recreation employs a casual temporary clerical position. In the summer, this position's full-time, 40 hours a week. And then during the school year, part-time, around 20 hours a week. Last fall, we hired an individual, Wendy Zimmerman, to be on a part-time basis. We thought we could move forward like with the current structure through the summer and be able to handle it with our additional staff. If you remember, we have Nikki in our office, Abby and Amanda, myself. And so far, it's been going really well. The only change would be this position would be kind of reflected to be more of a permanent part-time position than a casual temporary position. Casual temporary means we would have to let Wendy go in the summer, essentially release her of her duties, wait 90 days before bringing her back part-time. We find that almost no one comes back after you release them from their duties. They find some other job and they go find other things. So we start from scratch. So whenever you're hiring new employees, there's anywhere from, I would say, 60 to 90 days before they quite understand the job. This change would also reflect a reduction in hours. Currently, the hours are 1,200 for the school year and 504 for the summer. We'd be reducing them to 1,144. We were asking this to go to McGrath for placement in the compensation scale. In the memo, it shows an example of what the administrative associate one is and what it could be, but That's not what we're proposing. It's McGrath's decision. We're just giving an example of what it could be. It'd be a savings, even if it went to that level. So what I'm looking for tonight is approval to send this to the Common Council to send to McGrath for placement and bring back to this committee.
Your desire? Mrs. Tompkins?
Make a motion.
Move to approve by Mrs. Tompkins. Second by Mrs. Spiros. Discussion. Mr. Wagner.
Okay, the only real difference here is the hours, is that what it is? And I get a kick out of you, this is a casual, temporary, clerical, you couldn't get more vague than that.
It's not my position, it's the city's position
Yeah,
for all,
well,
across the board for all departments.
Be that as it may. Anyway, so there's nothing, so why do we need to send it to McGrath if the actual duties of the job haven't changed? It's it's just the hours that changed, right?
McGrath doesn't govern or oversee the casual temporary compensation plan.
That's sort of the point, because McGrath doesn't have anything to do with that. It's only to McGrath to determine whether or not it fits into what group. I mean, it seems like the council can decide for itself whether it fits into the plan once the recommendation is made. I mean, it's not,
All of our permanent part-time positions have gone to McGrath for placement and for
but
compensation.
this one, you've got somebody in it, right? Or not now? The person.
There's someone working there, correct, yes. Wendy's still
Someone
there.
did leave.
No, Wendy's still there.
Then what's changed?
Well,
Just the hours.
the structure itself has changed. It goes from full-time summer to permanent part-time year-round.
That's pretty thin gruel.
Well, that's
Anyway,
that's what the change is.
Mr. Bard? Microphone?
You're basically asking to make this the category of a permanent part-time position, correct?
Correct. Similar.
And that's the difference as opposed to, we've been kind of phasing out the casual temporary thing. We had many of those years ago, and there was some, because of turnover and other reasons, we felt it was best to go to a permanent part-time position with a different status. That's the reason why it becomes part of our pay plan if we do this.
Mr. Wagner.
Yeah, to be clear, my objection to it isn't with having the position or having it as a part-time permanent position. My objection is sending it to McGrath.
Mrs. Tompkins.
So when we send it to McGrath, I have two questions. How much does it cost? And then what information do we get that we need that we don't have?
Mr. Bard.
Well, yeah, thank you. It costs us $150 to send a job description to McGrath for review and for pay grade placement recommendation. And what they'll do is they'll come back and they'll look at what Justin was referring to in terms of what the title of that position should be. And based on the duties, they'll look at our full range of pay plan. You've seen our scale before. And they'll look at all the other comparable positions along with the duties and make a recommendation of where that belongs for us to consider. So again, it's the permanent part-time status, if that's what you decide to go with, that triggers that it ought to be reviewed by them and placed along with all of our other positions on that pay scale.
Mrs. Spiros.
So, yeah, it does get confusing. This is nothing against you. This is just the procedure. But, okay. So what you're saying is when this was a casual position, McGrath never looked at this. They don't look at any of our casuals, correct?
Correct. And the
When
closest.
we hire a casual, how do we come up with their wage? Or,
Well, yeah, casual temporary, I think that Mr. Wagner's right. I mean, those decisions were made directly by the council. Those are supposed to be positions that are, like Justin is talking about, maybe it's more seasonal or more flexible in terms of the number of hours. We had a position like that at one point in the clerk's office. And when we decided to make it permanent part-time, 20 hours a week, and more of a regular thing, we did send it out to McGrath and they put it on our pay scale as administrative associate or whatever they called it. But we really are trying to phase out casual temporary because first of all, we were underpaying most of those individuals, I believe. And secondarily, it's hard to keep people when it's like, well, you might work for quite a bit during this month and then next month you might be sitting around. And that's not usually what most people looking for part-time work are hoping for.
so if I may.
Yes.
So yeah, I understand all of that. But I guess what I'm understanding is that, okay, we have the title of the position, right? It's a clerical 2 position.
Yeah.
Clerical 2, that's the name of it, right? Clerical 2, whatever. So we wouldn't be changing that. This person would still be a clerical 2. It's just that you're wanting them to be full-time year-round instead of, or you're wanting to be part-time year-round instead of casual and then full-time in the summer, like is what you have done in the
Yeah,
past.
McGrath has typically selected the title of the individual, the
Right.
person.
But won't this person still be doing the exact same thing, except they're just going to be there with you all the time?
Correct.
So why do we send it then? I guess is the
Well, it's, okay, first of all,
why don't we just say, yeah, go ahead and hire your permanent part-time person as a clerical 2 position, you know, and offer a wage that you feel is, you know, somewhere in the ballpark that's proper.
you could do that, Rebecca. We just agreed a long time ago when, in working things out with McGrath, when they did the pay study in 2018, that we would send for review any changes or revisions with permanent, full-time or part-time people. Below that, casual, seasonal, temporary, that would be the domain of our local elected officials directly. So, I mean, it's your choice. If you don't want it to be a permanent part-time position, I think that's been better for recruitment and retention because it gives them a different status. But is that jump from casual, seasonal, or temporary to permanent part-time, as we call it, that triggers us sending it to them, for them to look at that compared to all the other work we have on the scale, whether it be administrative associate level or something else, and put them where they believe their level of work belongs. So if you continue to go with what you have right now, yeah, you don't have to send it to McGrath. But I think the thought is here to make it a permanent part-time position, give it that status like other people, other clerical people, and have a pay grade assigned for that person. Go ahead.
Okay. It continues to be confusing.
Okay.
And I'm just trying to think of it in what I know to be how it works. So I am a casual, I have a casual job as a registered nurse for my company. If I wanted to become full-time and they offered me that job, they would simply go into the HR and they would change my thing from PRN to permanent part-time or full-time, whatever. And then they would just be like, okay, you're here more often this week and here's your pay. So I guess that's where the confusion is why is it so necessary to always send everything? I get this, and even though it's only $150, I understand, because what I guess I'm not understanding is what's the difference? We can grant that he changed this to a permanent part-time person. I guess we're missing what McGrath's going to offer to us. Like, are you looking for them to be paid at a much higher wage than your casual that's leaving? No.
That's just, it's the, like you said, it's the hours from.
Right. So what I guess I'm trying
And this is how we've always done it before. And,
Right.
And if we want to change, I'm okay with whatever. Just what
Yeah,
we've
I
done.
understand why you're bringing it, because this is the way we've done it. But I guess
Always.
right now what we're doing is we're just examining if that step really truly is necessary. Is this something that we've been doing all along that wasn't necessary? Now, I could understand if we were switching this casual person and then hiring a permanent part-time person and significantly changing her duties, then I get that. I understand why you would want to send it to McGrath. You're going to be like, hey, look, we're getting rid of this casual position. We're bringing in this permanent part-time, and we want to alter what she actually does, or he, whatever, significantly. So now we need you to relook at the things that we're going to be asking this person. Does that make sense?
I totally get what you're saying. I completely do. And I understand the rationale. For better or for worse, back in 2018, we made the decision that all permanent employees, whether they were going to be new positions or revised positions, we were going to send it to our compensation consultant for them to look at the benefits, look at it, look at the duties, look at it compared to other positions around them that we actually have that we're using in various areas that might be comparable, and slot them where they believe the correct pay grade is. So I mean, if a position is considered seasonal, for example, we have summer workers all the time, and every year you adopt a new schedule for summer work. You give the lifeguard another $1 or whatever. You do that right here. You don't send it to McGrath. It's thought that we're talking about a status here, more of an ongoing permanent status, that we ought to treat them as a permanent employee, and therefore we ought to look and see where they belong compared to other clerical people or whatever. You don't have to do this.
Okay, we're not contractually obligated with McGrath to do it that way.
Oh, gosh, no.
Okay.
They're going to review everything we send them. You don't have to send them. We just believe that as and we've done this several times. I mentioned the part-time position in the clerk's office from a couple of years ago. At the point we've decided this is the position we want more of a stable schedule and to be able to advertise and recruit and keep people And it seemed like the right time to say, let's just call this a permanent part-time position, find out what they think it's worth on our pay grade compared to other similar positions, and be done with it. But we don't have a contract that requires us to send anything to McGrath, quite frankly. We just think it's good practice.
Mr. Wagner?
Yes, thank you. I wasn't here, I think I had left in early 2018, but I wasn't here when you did this or because I don't remember anything about this adopted as a informal policy. There's no written policy, I'm sure there isn't. But
It probably isn't.
But the thing that the only logical reason I would say that moving a casual person to a permanent part-time would be if the administration, that would be you, convinced us that there was a lack of personnel in one particular area, and maybe even that they would have to take, that a full-time person could take on more responsibility, a full-time, part-time person, you know what I mean? Permanent, yeah. You guys, I love your nomenclature here, but anyway, the point is, if there is no material change in the job, in the job duties, and no, well, he's given us a justification of why it should be permanent part-time, but there's no material change in here that would justify us spending another $150 on it. Or, and I think I would feel a lot better if we had an HR person sitting over there and saying, well, I got your point, but here's what I want to do. And I'm not hearing that. So when we get an HR person on board, I'm sure they'll do a pay study real quick and see how everything goes if it's requested. But I don't see the need to send it out now.
I think the argument is that, we're looking at making a greater ongoing commitment to the position. We're looking to create stability where there's a better known work schedule. And as a result of that, we realize that person may look at other positions in the city and vice versa in terms of pay and say, is it now equitable? As opposed to the person who's recruited for part of the year, they come, they go, they work different hours. And truthfully, to be honest with you, I haven't tracked this very carefully, but my understanding is we've had a hard time keeping a lot of casual employees for that very reason. It's irregular and it's, and I'll be honest with you, you're probably picturing this being an increase in pay. I don't know if it will be. We've seen that from time to time before. Because quite frankly, we paid our casual employees in some cases very low, and as a result, we've seen them come and go sometimes in rather quick order. So you can do what you want with this, as you always have the right to do, certainly. But I think what Justin is saying, to make it a permanent part-time position, give it status, give it a more regular schedule in the long term, make a longer term commitment to the position, it would seem fitting to send it to McGrath, who's never seen this before. They never reviewed it as a casual, and they'll look at it compared to other positions and say, you know what, this person is doing work that's equivalent to this other position, and therefore, even though they're working less than 40 hours, they should get commensurate pay. Again, you may look at me 2 weeks from now and say, Steve, I told you it was going to go up. And maybe it will. I don't know. But it seems like that's a step from a casual temporary employee to somebody permanently put on our pay scale, that this position is going to go on long term.
Just one last,
Go ahead if you want to clarify, Mr. Wagner.
The one thing that I perceive to be true is that the reevaluation of the job, or the evaluation of the job, or reevaluation of the job by McGrath is sort of a way of giving our staff a pay raise by a department head, by saying, I want to increase the duties of this person by doing this much, and they change a few words in the job description and ship it off to McGrath, is quite likely to see an increase in salary. And that has been the rule and not the exception for this for the past 2 years that I've been on the council. Which is different than what it was when I was on the 12 years before. But I just don't see McGrath as the be all and end all in it.
No, can I say one more thing real quick? I see Rebecca's got her hand up. I apologize. But I've had a lot of conversations with McGrath in the last 4 months, way more than I normally do because we haven't had an HR director. And believe me, she very clearly looks at They have a set structure of criteria. Do you use independent judgment? And all sorts of categories. And I've said, but doesn't it seem like this or doesn't it seem like that? And, that doesn't bend what they're looking at. They're looking at the categories that they've got laid out in terms of what skill level, what level of responsibility, what level of independent judgment does this position require. So there are times when I look at what they come back with and I say, oh, I thought it would be higher than that. And it's not, because they're looking, and probably vice versa, where they put something a little bit higher than I would think, but they're looking at the same set criteria no matter what we give them. They're not budging a lot for our comments or our questions or our thoughts, believe me.
I'm not going to argue anymore.
I'm not trying to be argumentative, please. I'm really not.
I'll take it up with you privately.
Mrs. Tompkins had her hand up next.
I did before she started waving. I just wanted to say that there is a value to having consistency throughout an organization, and there is a value to having an outside group objectively looking in. It sort of takes away from favoritism or thoughts of favoritism and things like that. So that is something we do need to say there's value to.
Mrs. Spiros.
Okay. So being that this position has never been looked at from McGrath, I can kind of understand why we do that. And I will support doing that in this situation. But I think this is something maybe we can look at more in depth, maybe not routinely having to do this. At some point, I feel like when we have an HR director, she should be able to competently make some of these decisions herself by just looking at, the area and what that sort of position pays in surrounding areas. So I think that's one of the things, and we're just all trying to save a buck here. I mean, I don't want to pay the $150 every time that we want a position re-looked at. And maybe $150 doesn't sound like a lot, but when you do it over and over and over. So maybe this is something we can look at. This position hasn't been looked at McGrath, so I will support this for the consistency and for the outside opinion. But in the future, maybe we can re-examine whether that's something that we really truly need to do, especially when we're looking at more of entrance level positions or lower level positions. And I don't know that this is the case, but I'm just saying, in the future, maybe once we get an HR director, we can relook at that. At this point, I will support this time.
I had a couple questions myself. These casual temporary positions, you said that they're a limited position. They can only work in the position for so long and then they need to be off work for 90 days. Why?
Labor laws require that. If you have someone permanent part-time, they're governed by different laws. So Jennifer Reku told us that if you're going to continue to keep Wendy, you'll have to make her permanent part-time.
Okay. And I would imagine a casual temporary, as Mr. Wagner commented, the great terminology here. Casual temporary, I would imagine would probably be paid a little bit less than a permanent part.
Typically, those seasonal employees are paid at a lower wage than our full-time or permanent employees.
Okay. And I'm assuming that once this position goes off to, I assume that if and when this position goes off to McGrath to be studied, and if and when they tag a title on this, it's going to be a title different than the current title.
And the casual temporary?
Well, the clerical too.
Yeah, potentially, I guess.
Yep. So I'm wondering, are we then required at some point to post that and not just give it to Wendy, but post it as a new position and then Wendy has to apply and go through everything?
Great question for that HR director. I wish we had.
Okay. And then the last question I have, it seems odd to me that in your department, you would have a position that is so unique that we don't already have a similar position within the organization here at the city, that you could say this position is basically this position, and we'll just make it this position as a permanent part-time.
Well, there's
administrative associate or whatever the position might
I believe the casual temporary clerical 2 position, which is very wordy, has been around for quite a while. I know Steve mentioned it earlier, it has been pretty common in most departments. Steve was even surprised that we had it yet, but I guess we're the only department that has a casual temporary clerical position. And I don't keep track of other people's employees or what they have from their organization, but this is, I guess, one of the few left.
Okay, I guess what I'm wondering then is, if we had these in the past and they became something else, what did they become? And can this just become that? We save a hassle and it's now given the title that all these other ones became.
Most of them become administrative associates 1, 2, or 3. That's
Okay.
that's why I have the example down below. But that we did this with the senior center, and they came up with a new pay grade for that position. They created a whole new pay grade, which was another addition to our compensation plan. They created a lesser one.
So they may come back and say this is administrative associate 2 and just put it on that pay scale.
Or they could come up with a different title and not put it on a current plan.
Okay.
And to add to that, they may well do what you're suggesting, I think, is they may well look at the fact that in recent years, in the clerk's office or somewhere else, we've had a similar type position and put them at this particular grade, and they look at the duties between that one and this one and say they are pretty similar. I mean, and that goes to the argument, maybe we're spending $150 without doing it, but it's been our way of making sure and I'm not trying to be wasteful with $150, but that we really truly can tell the world this position and this position are equivalent before we just run out and start paying people amounts of money that we're not really sure tie to duties or responsibilities.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from anybody on the committee? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and vote. So we have at this time a motion to send this to McGrath for a compensation study and essentially a titling of the position as well. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No,
That passes 3-1.
I'm getting used to it.
All right, number 10. Request to recommend council approval of pay grade placement for administrative associate 2 position under clerk and finance, and authorize staff to fill this new position, presented by Steve Barg, city administrator.
Thank you. Normally, if we did have an HR director, you probably recall that individual, Jen, when she was here, would be presenting at this point, because we've already had the presentation 2 weeks ago from the department head, or Jordan Munger in this case, the accounting manager, talking about the position. And now we've sent it to McGrath, and I'm bringing back what Milena of McGrath is recommending for a pay scale in the place of an HR director. But I want to touch on this a little bit. We do have Jessica here, and we have Jennifer here representing clerks and finance offices in case there's any questions. But I think Jordan did a really nice job 2 weeks ago outlining this. I'll touch on just some of the highlights. We had, in 2020, we redid the Public Works Administrative Associate 3 position to be doing work for both the Public Works Office and the Clerk's Office, sort of on a roughly 50-50 basis. And recently that individual has resigned, the person doing that, and that brought to mind the possibility of what do we do next. And one of the options was certainly the city clerk's office needs someone working, especially certain times of the year with elections and other things. They need somebody for at least half-time to be a valuable part of their department. Finance had a half-time clerk position that they did not refill in March after the individual left. They kind of hit the pause button, Jennifer in part until the new accounting manager was on board to see what the options were. They've done a good job of talking to one another, working out an idea that they could share a position better between clerk's office and finance, where there's more synergy in terms of the timing of the duties. You know, finance needs it more during the tax collection time, and clerk's office needs it more during elections and other activities. So it's a good marriage, it appears, at a roughly 50-50 between those two departments. This would not be adding a position, because if you were doing the math as I was speaking, that half-time person, half-time part of the Public Works Associate position would just be moved over and combined with the Finance Department's already half-time vacant position to create this job. And I think it'll be a very effective one for our organization. So with that in mind, the job descriptions of the previous 2 jobs are in the packet for you to look at, along with the new one. I did send it out to McGrath for review, and you have the memo in your packet from them suggesting a pay grade of 121 for what is they agreed with calling Administrative Associate 2 for this position. So my recommendation would be that the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee recommend council approval of having this position and putting it at pay grade 121 and authorizing us to fill the position.
Mrs. Tompkins? Microphone.
I motion to approve.
All right, we have a motion to approve. And we have a second. Zero. Questions, Mr. Wagner?
Yeah, and this I think highlights what I was trying to get at in the last one, and that's, there are different duties here. You're putting different combinations together, and that's fine. That did it. The question I have is the pay grade they're putting in higher than the pay grade that they were in, that the incumbent was in last time? It's 120, it's at 121, you said?
Yeah, I know the Public Works employee was Administrative Assistant 3, Administrative Associate, and
So it's in between.
so it's in between. Yeah, the Finance Clerk was 120, was a 2, and the Administrative Associate for the Public Works was 123. This would be a 122 for the entire job.
Is that more than they were getting earlier?
No, that's one step. Well, that's one step below what the Public Works Associate was getting for those duties, and the same as the Finance Clerk was getting for those duties. So all in all, when you put it together, there'll be benefits, but then beyond that, it's not a higher pay grade, no.
They've essentially wedged it in between the two that were
Correct.
existing.
That's what we've done. We fudged it in between the two.
So this was one half-time position, this was the other, this one fits right in the middle.
Okay.
And when I say with benefits, as we'll talk about in a minute with the other position, you're not adding a benefit eligible position because the Public Works Associate piece is being farmed out into 2 different places, had benefits. The benefits already existed for that employee. And effectively, you're going from, if you approve both of these, you're going from 2.5 FTE to 2.0 FTE for the same operation.
Any other questions or comments? All right, seeing none, we have a motion to recommend council approval of the placement on the pay grade and the authorize of the filling of the position. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion carries. Number 11, request to recommend council approval of pay grade placement for the administrative/permit specialist position, presented by Steve Barg, City Administrator.
Thank you. I did ask Dan to come up and make some comments. I introduced this two weeks ago to the committee, and I gave kind of an overview of this position, what we're recommending, and how this would work. And I kind of tied it to the position that you just gave approval for. But Dan wasn't here; he's on vacation, and he's a central part of this, being the person who's been overseeing that Public Works Associate 3 position, and who would be obviously deeply involved in this new position. So Dan, go ahead, and if you want to give an outline, that'd be great.
Right, so this is the rest of the story. So the incumbent position that we talked about was a shared clerk's public works position. And with that resignation in May, we've now seen 3 employees come and go in that role in less than 3 years. And the feedback we've gotten is that it's been very difficult to master the duties of both the clerk's department with elections and licensing and permits, as well as the public works side of it. Essentially, we're getting the message that it wasn't a very good fit. We still think that sharing a position with Public Works and somebody else makes sense. We don't think we have a full-time effort for the Public Works. And by the way, that position also assists engineering and admin duties as well. But we don't think that's a full-time position. We do think it's a better mix to combine that position with development services. In fact, if you remember in the old City Hall, Public Works and Building Services shared the same floor, and those 2 admins shared each other's duties when one was gone, serving as backup for each other. Similarly, as you just discussed, the clerks and finance departments seem to have better synergy in sharing a position, and that, of course, you've already talked about. So one thing that allows this to happen is our improvements in Evolve permitting software, which has allowed our whole process to go online. And the permitting process can be done at home, anytime, day or night, applying for permits, making payments. And it's really streamlined our entire process. We have much less walk-in traffic. Permitting used to be a very paper-intensive process with plans and permits and correspondence and approvals and that sort of thing. Now there's virtually no paper involved. It's all done electronically. So it started in 2021 with the building services permitting systems. In early 2022, we added some engineering permits. We started working with the fire department on evolved permitting, and there's a lot more that can be done. But what this has done is created some capacity in the development services administrative associate that could take this on. We've also learned that we need a technical expert on staff to be able to deal with the permit implementation, helping customers as they learn the process. A lot of people are getting into this for the first time, have to set up their account and so forth. And our current administrative associate in the development services department has by default become this expert. She's taken all the training. She's helping contractors manage the process, interacting with the customers, troubleshooting when needed, and preparing reports and updates and so forth. So we actually considered this arrangement 15 months ago when the public works / clerk's position was open the last time. We just weren't far enough along in the evolved permitting implementation to know that we would have some capacity in the development services role. So we chose not to jump into it or suggest it at that time. Today, we think it's a good fit. This position would be titled an administrative permit specialist. The job description was in your packet. This one has also gone to McGrath for review. And the recommendation is a pay grade 126. In the end, this is not an additional FTE. We're taking half of what was the public works component of the admin clerk and assigning it to the administrative assistant in the development services department. So with that, I would recommend approval of this pay grade 126 for the administrative permit specialist.
And if I can add to that real briefly before discussion too, I was the one who communicated with McGrath, and it is a healthy pay grade jump from the current position or the current pay grade for the development services administrative associate. And I challenged him one more time to take a look at internal equity and review it very carefully to make sure that there was a comfort level with what was being recommended. And what came back to me a couple of days later was, yeah, absolutely. This is looking at the criteria we use for how jobs are rated. The pay grade 126 is what we believe is appropriate. I also want to add one more thing, and I think I said this 2 weeks ago, not to pat staff on the back because that's not the point here, but I think you've challenged us before. This whole idea about us bringing every job to this committee before we refill it. And I think you made it very clear. Part of the reason is you want us to look for efficiencies. You want us to look for different ways to do things rather than just keep filling the positions, same old, same old. I think this entire combination of what you just saw from the clerk's finance department and public works and development services department is an example of 4 departments getting together and saying, for customer service purposes, for more efficiency and effectiveness, we've come up with a better model. And I think this really, if implemented as a full model tonight and approved by the council next Tuesday, is going to be something that you're going to see some efficiencies and some overall improvements in our operation. So I would concur with the recommendation.
It's a pleasure.
Well,
Mrs. Spiros? So we have a motion by Mrs. Spiros to approve, seconded by Mrs. Tompkins. Discussion. Mr. Wagner.
just out of curiosity, what pay grade? It's in 146 now, or excuse me, 126 now. What was the pay grade before?
122 is the current pay grade for that, the Development Services Administrative Associate 3.
About a $9,000 a year rate.
I didn't look at the exact number, but it's 4 pay grades.
I got it up here.
Okay. That depends on placement, though. That depends on placement within the...
One. Oh.
Mrs. Spiros?
Okay, so it is a significant raise, but with that being said, it doesn't sound like, it is a completely different position, and it doesn't sound like it worked the way we were previously doing it. And I agree with Steve. I commend the 4 departments for coming together and presenting what they feel is a viable option in job sharing these positions. So I do want to commend you all for doing that. I think we're all trying to figure out the best way to do this in the most economical way. Do we have any room as far as suggestions of a pay grade? Do we have to go from 122 to 126? Would it be more palatable to go from 122 to 124, 125? Or do we just...
I'll give you my perspective because that's a really good question. And I used to talk to Jen about this a lot. McGrath doesn't run the city of Marshfield. we paid them $150 a crack to give us our best shot after reviewing the duties and the responsibilities and the requirements of the position, all the things I mentioned before. Do you have certain levels of authority? Do you exercise independent judgment? All those kind of things. And they give it to us, and it's up to us to do what we want to. In my 4 months here, and even in my time talking with Jen, I'm hesitant to go against that unless I feel I have a reason to do it, because I'm substituting my judgment for theirs. And that's why we sent it to them in the first place. And this is exactly why I said to Melena very clearly, I said, take another look at it. There may be some concerns even within this building where we're sitting right now about internal equity issues. Take another look at it. Make sure that you feel comfortable placing it where you're suggesting it should be placed comparative with other positions. And her response came back very strongly, you can do what you want to with it, Steve. This is where I believe this position ought to be placed from what I'm seeing from the job description and what I've been able to pick up from all the materials. So, I mean, can we do it? You could keep it at 122 if you felt that was appropriate. But my recommendation is usually going to be to go with our compensation consultant, because that's why we pay them money and look for their judgment. They're the ones who came up with the pay plan in 2018 to begin with.
Mrs. Tompkins.
Did you say that, is it Natalie who's you're hoping to fill this, that she had to do special training so that she could be sort of an expert on the permits? Is there anyone else, if she wasn't there, would that be taking away time from other people who should be doing other things to advise people about these permits? Is this in my perception, this would be a really important thing for her to know how to do this, and it would relieve other people from having to answer questions. Is that?
For sure, right. She has taken it upon herself to learn this and become our expert and help people with their questions, guide through, and she's got a very, friendly demeanor and approach that helps people feel comfortable with this. Not everybody's feels great about getting online to do permitting, but she's been able to guide people through it, and she's really become an expert at it and has a knack for it. And so we have come to rely on her for this. And honestly, someone with the interest and the drive to do this is part of the reason that we've considered this as an option.
I'll be honest, my question for Dan and Pat Kilty, who's on the development services side, now we don't have a development services director right now, so he's playing a key role there, is this marriage doable? In other words, we're basically asking somebody to take on a pretty significant chunk of somebody else's job in addition to their own, and the duties that come with it in terms of the capital improvement plan and all these other things. Is it a marriage that's workable? And the response I got was yes. That was my single biggest question. Because, this is kind of taken that halftime part of the other position that we had and melding it into this position.
Right, and I'll just add on to that that was our biggest question mark. Are we overloading this position by expecting her to take on the public works role? We're confident that she can do it with the capacity that we've realized with the Evolve software. And we have, I think we'll be in a good position with this. So I asked the question, what could go wrong with this? Well, maybe we have overloaded the position. What would that look like? We won't really know until we get through at least a year's cycle, an annual cycle of activity within the city. But our expectation is that the ebbs and flows of public works and development services mesh better than the ebbs and flows between clerk and the public works department. So our busy time is not necessarily the development services busy time. So we think it's a much better fit, and we have every reason to believe this will work.
Anybody else? I guess I have a couple of thoughts as well. The pay scale, I guess, doesn't worry me too much from the perspective is that there does seem to be some specialty training and whatnot. The thing that I'm surprised by is that doesn't seem to be identified within the new job description. So you have a potential individual for the position. That person is going to be taking on essentially a job and a half, if I understand, a full-time plus a half-time. So taking on the responsibilities of a job and a half. My question comes up with what happens if that person doesn't want the position, or if that person leaves the position, we need to refill it. Is it going to be possible to find somebody that has to take on what seems to me like a job and a half from what's been described in the past. So that would be my only reservation. Like I said, the lack of identification of those certifications, as well as the extreme number of duties. But like you said, you're not going to know for a year or so.
Right. I think two things there. The very first thing we had to understand is if Natalie was interested in doing this, and she was, of course, depending on how this outcome is tonight. But the second part of it is that if Natalie would leave, or if we'd have a vacancy in that position, what happens then? It's true that we do have all of this expertise in one person, but with small departments, that's pretty typical for us here in the city. We have one GIS specialist who has all that technology and knowledge, and if David left, we would have a hard time finding someone with his expertise to just step right in. There would definitely be a learning curve in that situation. If Natalie would leave sometime, there'd be a learning curve for anybody else who would come into that position. In our engineering department, we have one engineer who manages our street design software. That engineer left, we would have a learning curve and a difficult time filling that position. But that's just the nature of small departments here. You have a lot of expertise in one person, and it's just something you deal with when the time comes.
Any other questions or comments from anybody? All right, we have a motion to approve. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Thank you.
Motion carries. Number 12, request to recommend council approval of payroll resolution number 2022-19, adopting updated wage scale for all non-represented staff effective July 1, 2022, presented by Steve Barg, City Administrator.
Thank you. Every year at roughly this time, we adopt our new wage scale, assuming that there was an increase, and that hasn't always been the case, but most years it's been the case. We've adjusted the scale. And at the last council meeting and the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee meeting before that, the motion was made and approved to adjust the wage scale effective July 1st, 2022 by 2%. So the recommendation is for your approval tonight of payroll resolution number 2022-19, which would allow that scale to be adjusted by 2% across the board for non-represented employees effective July 1, 2022. And then the salary adjustments be made, along with that for the individual employees.
Spiros?
Move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion by Spiros, second by Wagner to approve. Any questions, comments?
I beat that one, didn't I?
Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carried. Number 13, request to recommend council approval to notify Marshfield Medical Center of the city's intent to renegotiate the terms of the following contracts: Advanced Life Support Intercept Services Agreement, Interfacility Transport Services Agreement, Hospital Medical Control Agreement. Presented by Steve Barg, City Administrator.
Thank you very much. Well, a few years back, we entered into agreements with Marshfield Clinic Health Systems, I guess I'll use that phrase. There have been a lot of them used during the last few years, but to do transports and other services for and with the clinic. And the Fire and Police Commission first got involved, and ultimately the committee here and the council did as well. They've been renewed a couple of times now, most recently at the end of 2019 for a 2-year period that covered January 1st, 2020 through December 31st of 2021. And they've continued because what these contracts say is if there's no attempt to suggest that there's going to be termination or a desire to renegotiate, they automatically renew. 3 of the 5 contracts that we have automatically renew as of July 1st of the year before. In other words, we have a 180-day notice we have to give if we want to terminate or to renegotiate those contracts. Those include the 3 that you just read: Advanced Life Support Intercept Services, Interfacility Transport Services, and Hospital Medical Control. The other 2 agreements, we only have to give a 60-day notice if we want to revisit before they would automatically renew as of January 1st of the next year. So I've been working with Jennifer and Jordan from Finance, and we've been meeting with Pete Flatty, Steve Bakos, and Mike Myers has been involved in that conversation as well from the Fire and Police Commission, looking at some of the things where we're at with finances in the EMS operation. And are we keeping up with the costs and those types of things? One of the things that came out of that conversation is that we haven't had adjustments to the clinic contracts at all during this period in terms of increasing the rates or whatever. So we go into this with no preconceived notion that we're going to be asking them for a considerable change in the structure of these agreements or the price tag of these agreements. But if we don't put a marker in on these 3 agreements before July 1st of this year, we automatically renew for the entire year 2023. And as a group, we feel it's appropriate for us to put that marker down, spend the next couple months at staff level, really digging into it, seeing whether or not we're being compensated adequately for those particular services that we provide, and then approaching the clinic if necessary. But we would approach this body first with our findings and talk to you about it a little bit before we have that conversation with clinic personnel. But we think it's worth this evaluation. It's been a few years, and as part of the overall financial well-being of the EMS operation, this is a piece. And like I said, if we wait till after July 1st, we wait another year. We think it's worth looking at now to see that we again are getting what we believe we ought to for these services. So my recommendation would be that the committee recommend to the council authorization for me to give notice to the clinic and let them know that we want to look at possibly renegotiating those 3 agreements.
What's your pleasure? Mrs. Spiros,
So moved.
second by Mr. Wagner. Questions, discussion? Mr. Wagner.
I was looking at the parties to the last contract, and for the city's side of the equation, it was the mayor, the finance director, and the clerk who were witnessing that. Who from the council was in on the negotiations?
I don't know that there even were negotiations last time. In fact, the terms continued as we talked about
That
this.
was a rollover, right? What you're saying is that was a rollover year?
It was, but we had to redo them because they were expiring. But I don't know that we had a lot of discussion. We just continued the same terms. And we'd agreed before that the Fire and Police Commission was not the body to be signing these. I know some of the conversations we had with the city attorney on that.
Right.
That's a city, a council issue because in fact, it's talking about finances on the long-term basis. So to your question, I don't think that there was any committee that evaluated back in 2019 whether we ought to modify the terms. We just kind of rolled it over. Now we're saying, wait a minute, it's been 5 years. We want to just see whether or not what we're getting for the services is adequate.
And there's another reason this is not just Fire and Police Commission, because this basically is the city's chance to say what they wanted the fire department and the fire and rescue department to be in terms of that, whether or not that we should have the contract and how much the contract should be. But the thing I want to get at, I'll go along with this as long as when you come back, you do not enter into negotiations with the clinic until there's some council representation in on those negotiations.
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. And I think that the first step is staff level evaluation. The next step is coming to this body in closed session under 1985, negotiating or discussing agreements and bring you the information we have you make a determination whether or not you think we ought to be approaching them. And at that time, we can talk about who ought to be part of that. That's my perception of how this walks down the road.
Definitely talk about it.
So this body will see this before there's any negotiations.
Correct. My intention is we come to you at staff level to this committee, closed session, or if you wanted to go full council straight up, whatever. But we talk with the proper elected officials and say, here's what we found. Here's what we're thinking we ought to be going to them with. What do you think? Are we on the right track? And then who ought to be the ones to be approaching them to look for modifying the terms of the agreement, if that's what we're doing.
Yes, Mr. Wagner.
Steve, as part of that, if may have a little colloquy with Mr. Barr.
You may have a chat.
Okay.
Yes.
Colloquy?
Colloquy, yes.
Never heard that word
A
before.
question and answer session. Okay. The point I'm trying to make on that is that as part of your review, is there going to be a balance sheet done on that contract, on the existing contracts to find out where we stand and how profitable they've been?
Well, I know, I can't speak to the exact process we'll go through, but one of the things we've been looking at is, are we covering the whole picture? In other words, okay, we get this much money, we do these things. What about overhead costs? What about those types of things? So I think you'll see a fairly comprehensive approach on our part, if that's what you're getting at.
If that comprehensive approach is financial, I'll be very happy.
Yeah, correct. I mean, in other words, an ambulance goes to to Madison or somewhere on a transporter or Eau Claire or wherever it is, are we accounting for the fact that we have to keep those vehicles up? We have to, replace them maybe earlier. Are we looking at the whole picture? That's my intent. We haven't really baked this very far. I mean, Steve and Pete have been wonderful to work with and talk to, but we haven't. What I want to do is say, will you authorize us to put the marker in the ground and say we want to spend the next 60 days or something like that, really digging in to see whether or not we're being compensated. And again, I want to say this, and people from the clinic have already reached out to the CAO and told them that there's no preconceived notion that we feel we're being treated unfairly. That's not the point. The point is it's been 5 years and it's time for us to do a deeper dive.
Fine. Like the colloquy.
Anything else, Mr. Wagner? All right, any other questions from anybody else? Seeing none, we have a motion to, what's our motion? Please.
Your motion is recommend council approval to notify Marshfield Medical Center of the city's intent to renegotiate the terms of the following contract: Advanced Life Support Intercept Services Agreement, Interfacility Transport Services Agreement, and the Hospital Medical Control Agreement.
All right, that is the motion on the table. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The motion carries. On number 14. Adjourn to closed session pursuant to Wisconsin Statute Chapter 19.85 sub 1, sub C, considering employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility, specifically promotion and setting pay grade for administrative/permit specialist. Do I have a motion?
Moved.
Motion by Wagner, second by Spiros. Roll call.
Witzel?
Yes,
Wagner?
Yes.
Spiros?
Yep.
Tompkins?
Yes.
we are in closed session. How much time does Tom need?
Oh, he said as soon as I got back here, so maybe,
Well, he just walked in here to check on sound.
Are we good?
okay.
All right, I'm going to assume that we're back on. So we are back in open session after discussing a promotion and pay grade situation. Any action to be taken? Mr. Wagner?
Yes, I would like to recommend to council approval to promote Administrative Assistant 3, Development Services to Administrative Permit Specialist on July 1st, placing her at step 2 of the pay grade 126.
Second by Mrs. Spiros. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion carries. All right, number 17, suggested items for future agendas. Mr. Wagner?
Yeah, it's been a while since we've had an update on the status of the lawsuits that the clinic has filed against the city, asking for reimbursement of those things. And there are two of them now. There's 2020 and 2021 in there. What I'd like to do, I'd like a briefing on that for the next council meeting. And I'd also like to see the administration give us a contingency plan of what we would do if the clinic were successful in those lawsuits.
Okay, duly noted. If I can add to that, somebody at the last council meeting asked if we have an update at the next council meeting on the 28th on the status of all our lawsuits. So I'll fold that in. I'll fold that into this.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Mrs. Tompkins?
I don't know if this has to do with finance. Can we get an update on like the property assessment and whether we are up to date on the city's property assessments?
Yeah, I mean, staff level, we've been talking about trying to get that, we've been working on an RFP for revaluation. I'll give you an update at the July meeting.
Anybody else? All right, saying no other action to be taken, declare this meeting adjourned.